the exam is rare, even for native speakers.
Not that easy, right?
Yes.
I'm very curious to test it out. Shall we give it a try?
Sure.
Let's do this.
합시다.
합시다. To really get into character and to set the scene, I brought some high school uniforms. No! I've never had to wear a school uniform, so I feel suddenly like I'm 10 years old. I'm really stressed out about this. Okay, so I heard for each question you get 1.5 minutes. So we're gonna do 5 questions, which means 8 minutes. Okay, ready, go.
19.
19, from number 19. Korean students are first introduced to English in primary school, and then it becomes one of their main subjects in high school, with almost every university requiring it for entry.
얼마나 많은지
3 minutes, 20 seconds. It's one thing to be tested on your technical skills in another language, reciting verbs, stringing together simple sentences, but the test in front of me is testing our comprehension and analytical skills. It's a challenge even for a native speaker like myself.
벌써 했어? 큰일 났다 이거.
쉽지 않네.
어땠어요? 좀
힘들었어요. It's been so long since I've had to do these kinds of things. 어땠어요?
It was quite difficult.
옛날 생각나면서 좀 짜증이 막 올라.
I mean, this isn't a foreign language. Like, it's crazy that you guys even take this at all. If I had to do a test in Korean, I would get 0 right. 0. Thankfully, though, it was in English and I nailed it. 100%. Well, the boys got a couple of questions wrong. Incredibly, Chung Hyun-jin, who finished the test before me, also aced it.
There's a theme for each problem and it's repeated for each year. So if I'm more exercised, I would have been able to solve it faster.
Korea is one of the most highly educated countries in the world, with 70% of young people going on to university. One of the only ways young people have to stand out from the pack is to have graduated from a Sky University. And with only the top 2% of Korean students getting in, the competition is fierce. How do you think that pressure has impacted your guys' generation?
워낙 이게 우리 세대가 인원이 많잖아. 지금에 비해서, 지금 일자리에 비해서 인원이 많다 보니까 이제 취직을 못하는 학생들이 되게 막 이런 것들이 많이 이제 저희 또래들한테 스트레스로 더 스트레스 받는 거죠. 그런 부분에서 그때 내가 이렇게 압박감을 견뎌내면서 공부해가지고 대학교 입학을 해가지고 이제 졸업하는데 이제 갈 데가 없는 거야. 네, 그러니까 그런 부분이 좀 아프지 않나. 네. 네.
Lee Jin-young is not alone in feeling like this. A 2018 report found that 1 in 5 people who are unemployed in South Korea are between 25 and 29 years old, the highest ratio in the developed world. The other day, I was walking in the street and then I saw a sign that says, over a hagwon, it said, like, this is a fun place to study. It's where your dreams come true. You know, but I felt like, you know, there's the goals that people have here, which is, you know, doing the Sky University, working at these big company names. But then is that also the dreams that young people have, or is that just the goals?
나는 고등학교 때 공부하면서 꿈이란 게 사실 없었던 것 같아요. I don't have dream, but just work. 꿈을 생각하기도 전에 너무 몰아붙이니까.
As I grow up, I think my dreams got smaller and my goals got bigger. Because if I work hard to come into a university that I wanted to come in, the next step is to work hard to go into a company that I want. And after that would be like to find the perfect someone to get married. It doesn't end from university. So I think it's inevitable that dreams get smaller.
one whole year of your life. Can you imagine? Every single day, maybe 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, studying for an exam that you already took and probably did well enough on the first round. I think probably a reckoning for them was to understand that this is actually just another step in a very long uphill path to continue to try to become successful by Korean standards. The burden of success has gotten so great that in a recent survey, 1 in 3 Korean students polled said that they had thought about suicide because of academic pressure, with anxiety about their future career cited as the second biggest reason. What happens to those who struggle to succeed in this rigorous system? With so much emphasis being placed on academic success in South Korea, life can be tough for students who don't excel. But for those who either don't fit into the system or simply want to opt out from it, there is another option. I've come to visit the Alternative Education Center, Haja. 2 decades ago, schools like this were non-existent, but now it is estimated that around 999 alternative education centers are dotted around the country.
영상 작업이나 이런 걸 계속 관심 있게 해왔고요. 우연히 작업장학교라는 곳이 있다는 걸 알게 됐어요.
The Haja Center focuses on helping children shape their own life plans and learn life skills in the process. I'm here to meet Lee Chung-han, the man in charge and a lifelong youth advocate.
그 한국의 이 좀 엄격하고 또 뒤떨어진 교육 시스템 때문에 청소년, 청년 일반이 굉장히 괴로움을 당하고 있다고 생각해요. 그러니까 청년들이 사회에 나왔을 때 사회에서 부딪히는 것은 정말 이 사회는 굉장히 창의적이고 어떤 소통적으로 살아야지만 일을 잘할 수 있는 사회로 변해버렸어요. 시스템 자체가 산업화 시대의 시스템이기 때문에 교육, 지금까지 받아왔던 교육은 여전히 또 충분히 창의적이지 않고.
In many ways, South Korea still lies in the shadows of its former military dictatorship. The iron-fisted regimes of the 70s and 80s tightly controlled what Koreans saw,
I'm in a meeting.
heard, and even
It's
thought.
Sarah's birthday, not
Education
Andy.
was a central tool in
Well, then
fostering
why Morley
obedience.
said to
And
Sarah,
some would argue that the arduous schooling young Koreans are subjected to is a legacy of that period.
차라리 권위주의적으로 진행시키는 것만 해라. 하고 있을 때는 그걸 하면 되는데 맹목적으로 지식을 자꾸 습득하다 보면 나중에 정말 그것이 내 것이 되지 않아서 사실상 그걸 잘하지도 못하게 된다고 저는 생각해요. 최소한 청소년기에는 이것들을 내가 왜 하고 싶은지, 그래서 결국에는 이 사회에서 내가 어떻게 쓰임이 있을 수 있을까, 이런 거에 대해서 고민을 해야 되거든요. 그런 거에 대해서 이제 하자센터는 좀 집중한다고 보면 되겠습니다.
But what happens when they go out into the real world, the outside world? What happens there?
많은 분들이 이걸 물어보세요. 쉽게 하면 이렇게 말씀드릴 수 있어요. 하자센터 출신 중에 서울시장의 최연소로 출마한 사람도 있고요. 네. 어떤 장애인 인권 분야에서 그 영화 감독으로서 또 작가로서 굉장히 두각을 나타내는 분도 있고, 네, 또 힙합, 한국 힙합계의 약간 그 대부 정도 되는 그런 사람도 있고. 근데 사실 저는 그런 분들의 이름을 부르는 것을 별로 좋아하지는 않아요. 사실 잘된 사람을 이야기하는 것이 또 한국 사회의 방식이에요. 어떤 고등학교를 나왔으면 여기서 대통령이 나왔습니다, 이건데 하자센터를 나와서 굉장히 어려운 삶을 살고 있는 청소년도 있을 거고요. 저는 하자센터가 주는 것은 졸업장이나 자격증이 아니잖아요. 삶을 계속 헤쳐나갈 수 있는 능력을 어느 정도 갖춰주지 않을까라고 생각해요.
It gives me so much hope that there are educators like Lee Chung-han here, who not only recognizes that the system is not effective for all, but is actively working to find other ways to equip the younger generation to survive modern-day Korea. With over 50,000 students dropping out of school each year, it doesn't surprise me that places like the Haja Center are becoming more popular. And yet there still seems to be a taboo that goes along with alternative education. Many universities won't accept students without the Korean SAT score. And even the government does not recognize the majority of alternative education centers. So how do the people who go here feel about that societal judgment?
여기가 저희 교실 여기거든요.
Ansol has been enrolled at Haja for the last year.
그 외에도 농사도 짓고 박토르나 요가도 하고.
진짜요? 요가도 해요?
네.
Her mother, Baek Yeon-hee, a private academy lecturer herself, made the decision for Ansol to enroll in the Haja Center after witnessing firsthand the pitfalls of mainstream Korean education.
기존의 학교 교육 시스템은 현실적으로 학교에서 교육을 할 때에는 어떻게 하면 대학을 더 많이 갈 수 있는가 거기에 맞추니까 그래서 그러다 보니까 실제로는 대학 입학에 가장 유리한 그냥 우등생들 위주로 그 아이들을 위주로 모든 게 돌아가요.
To build up off of that, do you ever worry that this might be a risk or put them at a disadvantage?
일단 당장 합류할 때는 불안감이 있고 또 어려운 점이 있을 것이라고 봐요. 그거는 당장 뭐 모든 걸 완벽하게 여기서 다 준비를 해서 애들을 내보내라라고 말할 수도 없고 그거는 공교육 과정으로도 안 되고 여기의 과정으로도 안 되고 기본 전제가 우리가 이 교육을 받는 목적이 뭐냐 이 목적이 대학 입학을 하기 위한 준비 과정 이게 아니라 어쨌든 여기 교육 과정이 끝났을 때 아이들은 사회에 나가서 대학 진학을 하든 한 명의 건강한 시민으로 살아가기 위해서 무엇이 필요한가 이런 걸 고민하면서 아이들의 교육 과정을 정해 나가고
밖에 나가면 전 그냥 자퇴생, 학교 밖 청소년, 미성년자 그냥 그 정도로밖에 설명이 안 되는 거잖아요. 저도 그걸 알고 있고 센터에 있는 많은 사람들이 그걸 이미 알고 있기 때문에 그게 약간 불안하기도 한데 그게 뭐랄까 막 내가 이 밖으로 나가면 위험한 세상에서 어떻게 살아가지 이런 느낌보다는 제가 느끼기에는 아무래도 센터에서 계속 배우고 접하고 그런 게 있으니까 저 위험한 세상에서 어떻게 살아가지 보다는 여기서 조금 더 내가 많은 걸 배우고 내 안에 있는 걸 조금 더 연마해서 저 밖에 있는 세상에서 내가 불만 있는 그 부분을 바꿀 수 있는 그 부분에 영향력을 줄 수 있는 그런 야망이 되게 생기는 것 같아요.
With young people like Ansol being encouraged to march to the beat of their own drum, my hope is that they will be the ones to shake the system up in the future. In the meantime, however, young people here seem to be trapped in a constant competition with everyone around them, and very few actually reap the rewards. With such intense pressure for everyone to be exceptional, the end result is that no one really can be. This has groomed a generation of disillusioned youths, and this disillusionment has become a language unto itself. I've come to meet Kim Sung-gi, a researcher who spent the last 8 years exploring the issues affecting Korean youth and the phrases that have come to define the generation.
수저론은 2016년에 헬조선이라고 하는 말하고 쌍으로 유행을 했던 말인데요. 수저론은 한국 속담에 어릴 때 이제 무슨 수저를 제가 정확하게 저도 잘 모르는 부분이 있는데 어릴 때 금수저나 뭐 다이아몬드 수저를 물고 태어나면은 이제 그 사람들은 아까 탄탄대로를 걷게 되고 어릴 때 부모가 돈이 없어서 이제 흙수저를 물고 태어난 사람들은 계속해서 가난하거나 굉장히 어려운 삶을 살게 된다. 이런 불평등이라는 개념이 집약되어 있는 유행어라고 할 수 있겠습니다.
I feel like there have been so many terms used to describe the younger generations of Korea. Mpose대, Sanpose대. Can you define these terms for me?
한국에서는 88만 원 세대는 유럽에서 1000유로 세대라는 1000유로 세대가 이제 비슷한 개념인데 한 달 동안 일을 해도 88만 원밖에 벌 수 없다라는 그런 내용의 어떤 굉장히 충격적인 이름이었고 그 이후로 청년들이 경제적으로 어렵다, 뭐 일자리를 구하기 어렵다, 뭐 이런 종류의 단어들이 많이 만들어지기 시작했고요. 그 중에 N4 세대라는 거는 청년들이 N가지를 포기했다라고 얘기를 하는 세대 명칭인데 원래 말씀하신 3포 세대가 시작이었어요.
Sampo generation was a term first coined in 2011. The phrase translates to three giving up generation. It refers to the three things the young generation has to give up due to increasing social pressures and economic problems.
3포 세대는 청년들이 경제적으로 어려운 이유 때문에 연애와 결혼과 출산을 포기했다라고 하는 이름이었는데 거기에 내 집 마련, 인간관계, 꿈, 희망, 건강, 외모 관리까지 다양한 것들이 포기한 것들의 목록에 들어가게 되면서 이렇게 숫자가 늘어나게 된 거죠. 그래서 N4 세대가 됐고
These terms seem to hit at the center of the tensions here in South Korea, that success and privilege go hand in hand.
나는 32년 된 3천만 원짜리 아파트에 산다.
I'm eager to understand what life is like here for those born without the proverbial gold spoon.
muy 높고 이제 그 분들의 제가 조건에 이제 맞지 않으니까요. 그래서 이제
Unlike the so-called American dream where anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, there is a tangible sense here that people are trapped by the circumstances of their birth. So what is life like here for those who find themselves at the bottom of the social ladder? I've come to Midyang, 4 hours outside of Seoul, to have dinner with Lee Chung-yup, a middle-aged manual worker.
좀 힘든 거 보여요.
우리 뭐 만들 거예요?
라면 끓일 겁니다.
네, 합시다.
예.
He is treating me to a Korean classic.
라멘, 라멘, 라멘.
Instant ramyeon noodles.
저는 라면 진짜 좋아요. Ramen is the best.
눌러주세요.
Lee Chung-yup has become somewhat of an internet celebrity in recent years.
이렇게 딱 있잖아. 그렇게 딱 하면 뭐가 문제야? 오케이?
He runs a popular YouTube channel with over 125,000 subscribers, entitled Old Bachelor Living Alone.
음식을 맛있게 보인다.
He is one of a reported 9 million single-person households in South Korea, a record high.
나는 32년 된 3천만 원짜리 아파트에 산다. 오래되고 낡은 아파트이지만 그럭저럭 살만하다.
It seems like so many people are watching your videos. Why do you think these types of videos have resonated so much with your audience?
또 이렇게 노총각으로서 혼자 살아가는 그 리얼한 모습 그게 뭐 이렇게 솔직한 리얼하고 그 또 보면은 또 댓글들 보면은 그냥 뭐 안쓰럽다 그러니까 좀 특이하다 그 일반적인 모습보다 뭐 불쌍하다 해서 본 사람도 있고 그 본 사람들이 다 각기 다른 생각으로 보더라고요. 계란 한 개 주시고요.
네. 계란 있어요. 그 라면 안에
예, 라면.
This is classic.
예, 알겠습니다.
네? 맛있겠다.
네. 예, 됐어요.
네, 감사합니다.
With so much emphasis put on social status here, I want to understand where this pressure to climb the ladder comes from and how it affects people like Lee Chung-yup.
그게 어떻게 보면 남들하고 비교하는 문화죠. 이게 뭐 다른 나라에도 그 모르겠는데 유독 한국 사회에서는 이제 그게 남하고 비교하는 문화가 엄청 강하거든요. 자기 친구가 그랜저를 사면 내가 만약에 소형차 마티즈나 뭐 모닝을 타면 엄청 자존심이 상해하거든요.
Do you feel like you are suffering from this current system?
그 영향이 있죠. 예.
어떡해요?
기간제로서 이제 그 기간제 한지는 벌써 한 14년 됩니다. 이렇게 뭐 학력차별이라든지 아니면 뭐 취업 언론이나 이렇게 노력을 해도 올라갈 수 없다는 그런 게 많지 않습니까? 그 일부
This inability to climb the social ladder is also having an impact on the personal lives of South Koreans.
저도 결혼하려고 많이 노력을 했는데 지금 현재 시대에 한국 사회에서 여성분들은 굉장히 이렇게 많이 문이 높은 세대거든요. 문이 높고 또 그분들의 제가 조건에 이제 맞지 않으니까요. 그래서 이제 전 만약에 여성분들이나 이렇게 연애나 결혼하고 싶어도 그게 짝이 없는 거죠. 그 여성분들이 제가 그게 그 여성분들 기준에 눈에 안 맞기 때문에 그렇습니다.
Cheong-yup is by no means alone in his singledom. Marriage rates in South Korea have fallen to an all-time low. So how is it that Koreans who have packaged and sold love internationally in the form of K-dramas have become so disillusioned with marriage? I'm dropping into one of the 1,600 matchmaking agencies in South Korea. Matchmaking is big business here, with the industry worth a whopping $88 million.
저희가 남성 회원님들, 그러니까 기자님께 만약에 남성 회원님을 소개를 드린다라고 하면 어떤 식으로 소개를 드리는지에 대한 샘플링이거든요.
I've come to meet Baek Ji-young from Duo, which claims to be the largest dating agency in the country.
보시면 남성분의 학력, 현재 그분이 어느 학교에서 무슨 전공을 하셨고 현재 무슨 일을 하시는지, 그리고 가족사, 그분의 가족이 몇 남매 중에 몇째고, 그리고 키라든지 현재 종교, 그리고 본인은 어떤 취미를 가지고 있는지.
100% satisfaction guaranteed.
네.
Why has marriage been such an important part of Korean culture?
대한민국은 특히나 유교 사회이기 때문에 역사적으로 보면 조선시대에는 굉장히 우리나라의 유교 시대가 굉장히 강했던 사회인데 그런 경우에는 사실 본인 대 본인도 중요하지만 본인과 본인 이외의 가족, 가문, 집안 대 집안끼리 좀 만남을 원하시는 경우들이 있어요.
But unlike during the Joseon dynasty, during the era of Hell Joseon, remaining unmarried is one of the core traits that has come to define the so-called Sampo and Empo generation.
사실 비혼이라는 게 본인이 자발적으로 선택을 한 친구들도 굉장히 많지만요. 사실 비혼이라는 단어도 남성분들보다 여성분들이 더 많이 썼던 거는 사실인데요. 저희 듀오에서 예전에 한번 조사를 했던 것 중에 하나가 결혼 후에 행복해질 것이다라는 확신을 남성과 여성이 어느 정도를 느끼냐에 대한 질문을 한 적이 있었는데 남성분들은 거의 40% 정도가 굉장히 긍정적인 답을 주셨고 여성분들은 반면에 한 22% 정도밖에 나오지 않았거든요. 결혼을 함과 동시에 본인의 커리어를 놔야 되고 가사와 육아에 대한 부분을 본인이 온전히 다 흡수해야 된다는 생각 때문에 결혼에 대한 압박이라고 표현할까요? 그런 부분에 대해서 여성분들이 조금 더 강하게 느꼈을 수는 있습니다.
Here in Korea, there is, of course, a word for those who choose to remain unmarried, bihon. Its usage has increased sevenfold on social media over recent years, and as my duo matchmaker revealed, is most commonly associated with women. I've come to meet the founders of Bipyeong magazine, a publication dedicated to embracing single life, to try to understand what is motivating these women to make such a drastic decision.
I feel like the term bihon is very unique to Korea.
그러니까 한국 사회가 이미 결혼을 너무 기본값으로 세팅을 하고 있기 때문에 그런 것 같아요. 그러니까 예를 들면 결혼을 하지 않은 사람을 표현할 때 우리는 미혼이라는 단어를 사용해 왔어요. 그런데 그 미혼이라는 건 안일 미자 한자를 써서 결혼을 하지 않은 사람, 아직 결혼을 못한 사람을 뜻하는 말이거든요. 그런데 내가 일평생 나는 결혼이라는 제도 안에 들어가지 않을 거야 라고 말하는 사람들을 표현하기에는 좀 적합하지 않은 단어였어요. 그냥 뭔가 뭐 노처녀, 노총각 이런 말들로 표현을 해왔고.
When people use the word 비혼, does it come with any negative connotation still?
굉장히 저는 개인적으로는 부정적인 이미지가 많다고 생각을 해요. 약간 제가 느끼기에는 아직도 사회가 이제 제가 결혼을 안 하는 거를 표명을 하는 거에 대해서 난 결혼하지 않겠어. 결혼을 못 하는 게 아니라 내가 자신이 내가 안 하는 거야 라고 얘기를 했을 때 사회는 네가 뭔데 안 해. 약간 이런 분위기가 있는 거예요. 약간 좀 압력을 가하는 거죠. 왜냐하면은 이게 한국에서는 이제 그게 프로세스처럼 이어진다고 말씀을 드렸었잖아요.
What is it about Korean society, do you think, that has made so many people reject the notions of marriage?
비혼을 이제 하고 싶어하는 여성들이 많아진 이유는 시간이 지나면서 이게 저는 교육적인 부분이 굉장히 크다고 생각을 하는 사람인데요. 과거에 저희 어머니 세대나 그 이전에 이제 할머니 세대가 교육을 받을 수 없기 때문에 어떻게 보면은 이게 굉장히 좀 잘못되어 있는 구조들을 보지 못하고 이제 우리 세대 여성들을 이제 어떻게 보면 그 동시대 남자들과 같은 교육을 받았고 이제 저희는 이제 사람으로서 가져야 될 그런 주체성에 대해서 조금 더 이제 탐구를 할 수가 있는 그런 시각을 갖추게 됐고 네.
With a generation of young people rejecting one of the central pillars of Korean success, it's becoming evident that far from just youthful angst, the issues are deeply systemic.
한국 사회에서 불평등이 굉장히 심각해지고 있는데요.
There is so much talk here about how the younger generations are simply throwing in the towel. And yet, on my journey, every young person I have met is questioning and challenging the status quo. Are young people really just giving up on life? Or are they simply choosing to opt out of a system that does not deliver on its promises? I've come to the studios of Lunch, a band made up of 30-something-year-olds that captures the voice of this generation.
I've been hearing a lot about these terms, imposede, samposede. What do you guys think about that?
저는 포기하는 거에 대해서는 필수 항목이라 생각해요. 어쨌든 다 누릴 수는 없는 거고.
포기라고 단어를 했는데 내가 이걸 포기했다가 아니라 내가 이걸 하기 위해서 이걸 안 하는 게 내가 투자를 한 거다. 그냥. 이렇게 좋게 생각하면은 조금 그냥 긍정적으로 생각이 되지 않을까 싶어요.
I'm trying to understand and get a sense of how big class divides are here. From everything I've seen, it seems like unless you have money, you can't reach success.
저는 그 계급이 그닥 부당하게 느껴지지 않는 사회로 지금 발전해가고 있다라는 게 너무 희망적이죠. 어렸을 때는 가난하고 멍청하고 돈 없으면은 멸시받고 무시받고 부당한 일을 당한다라는 인식이 있었는데 지금은 그런 사회는 아니에요.
근데 왜 바뀌었어요?
인터넷.
지금은 인터넷 PC 세대들이 바꿔놓았다고 생각하는데
뭐 이제 숨길 수가 없잖아. 예전에는 숨겼는데 인터넷 때문에
데모하고 싸우고 좀 무너뜨리고 그걸 쟁취하려고 싸우는 부모님들 밑에 세대라서 이게 부당하다 그러면 가만히 있지 않는 법을 배웠어요.
Have you guys heard of this term 헬조선?
경쟁하는 애들, 경쟁에서 그렇게 열심히 해서 1등하는 애들은 억울해. 헬조선이야 거기는. 걔네들은 헬조선이지. 내가 1등 하려고 얼마나 최선을 다했는데 과외로 몇백만 원짜리 받고 했는데 근데 저는 그렇게 열심히 안 살았어요. 나한테는 헬조선은 아니에요. 너로 먹고 살 수 있어. 먹고 사는 게 그렇게 굶어 죽지 않아요.
중식이 형이랑 했던 얘기에 살짝 연장선인데 저희 우리 대한민국은 교육이 엄청 많잖아요. 이제 남은 자원이 밑에 지하 자원이 많은 것도 아니고 이제 인적 자원이라고 하죠. 이제 거기에 대해서 투자를 많이 하는 편인데 근데 이제 그런 우리 젊은 층이 직면한 문제가 바로 그런 거예요. 내가 무슨 일을 하더라도 자신감을 갖고 그 직업에 대한 자부심을 갖게 이 나라를 구성하는 직업에 대해서 편견 없는 교육을 해주는 게 우선이라고 저는 생각을 해요.
Do you guys think it's fair that the 2030 generation has been labeled as giving up?
기성세대라고 해서 부모님 세대나 할 수 있는 건 다 해본 거예요. 결혼도 하고 그러면서도 경제 성장이 있으니까 그때는 노력하면 노력의 대가가 바로 나왔거든요.
나는 그냥 짧게 얘기하면 그들이 생각하는 그 노력에 대한 어떤 거에 대해서 노력을 해야 되냐, 그분들이 생각하는 그 어떤 것에 대한 기준, 우리가 생각하는 우리는 이걸로 노력을 할 건데라는 그 기준, 이 기준이 되게 다른 것 같아요.
진짜로 행복함을 위해서 살아야 되는 삶을 살아야겠구나 라고 하고 행복하게 살려고 그러니까 왜 노력을 안 하니라고.
이분들은 이걸 노력해서 이렇게 해야지. 우리들은 노력해서 행복하게 살고 싶은데 왜 기성세대들이 살아온 대로 우리가 살면서 우리 행복한 거를 버리고 해야 되냐.
행복 만능주의라고 교육을 해놓고.
빛나는 별이 눈왔으면 아무도 의심한 적 없었죠. 몰랐어요. 난 내가 똥벌레란 것을. 그래도 괜찮아. 그러니까
It's just funny that they can acknowledge that, you know, there is an undeniable hardship that comes with being a young person in this country because of this constant effort that you keep having to put in, but the return and the reward is just not worth it. For them, they're just like, you know what? I'm not even going to put in that effort. They have been able to essentially liberate themselves from the expectations of society to create a space of happiness and contentment. I think that's a very powerful thing.
I'm curious if this liberation is widespread enough to affect real systemic change. The image of Korea as Hal Chosun has been further bolstered by the view that politicians in Korea are out of touch and dishonest. A number of scandals and accusations involving corruption, nepotism, and abuse has led to 68% of South Koreans feeling pessimistic about the way their political system works. Here in Seoul, the mayoral election is right around the corner. Everywhere you go, the streets are covered in posters and banners, and there are several new young faces running on platforms not typically seen here. I've come to the campaign headquarters of one such candidate.
한국 사회에서 불평등이 좀 굉장히 심각해지고 있는데요.
Shin Ji-hye is a 33-year-old feminist and the socially liberal mayoral candidate for the newly formed Basic Income Party.
부동산과 관련된 세금을 더 정의롭게 더 걷어서 모든 시민들에게 기본소득으로 나누는 것이 부동산 불평등 문제를 해결할 수 있는.
This universal basic income they are proposing is a radical idea and one that has not been achieved anywhere else in the world.
사실 저희에게는 모든 것이 다 불가능해 보였던 것들을 좀 하나하나 차근차근 이뤄가고.
Fellow party member Young Tae-in joins the discussion. At just 31, she is the floor leader and their only member of the National Assembly. With 81% of the National Assembly being men and the majority of them in their 50s, these women aren't your typical South Korean politicians.
Do you feel like politics has failed this younger generation so far?
그러니까 한국은 이제 두 개의 정당이 계속해서 번갈아 가면서 집권을 해왔고 국회 안의 구성도 두 개의 정당이 거의 이제 300명 국회의원의 대부분을 차지하고 있는데요.
Since its democratic transition in 1987, South Korea's political system has been dominated by two parties, the People Power Party and the Democratic Party of Korea, who are currently in power under President Moon Jae-in.
그러다 보니까 누가 돼도 사실 달라지지 않는다라는 것을 어렸을 때부터 계속해서 학습해 왔던 세대들이 있기 때문에 오히려 정치로부터 청년들이 멀어지거나 아니면 정치 혐오 같은 것들이 생기거나 정치를 통해서 내 삶이 바뀔 수 있다, 대한민국이 바뀔 거다라는 희망을 좀 갖지 않게 되는 것 같고.
This universal basic income is not something that's been achieved in any other country. What do you say to people who say that this is unrealistic?
오히려 다른 나라들에 비해서 기본소득을 먼저 시행하기에 좀 좋은 조건에 놓여 있다. 그래서 비현실적이지 않고 다만 결단이 필요한 문제다라고 보고 있어요.
사람들의 삶에서 기본소득과 비슷한 제도들이 많이 생겼기 때문이기도 하거든요. 서울이 아닌 경기도에서도 청년 기본소득이라는 것이 시행되고 있고, 그리고 만 7세 미만 어린이들에게 그것도 부모의 자산 심사 없이 모두에게 아동수당을 지급하고 있는 거나, 그리고 코로나 때문에 작년에 전국민 재난지원금을 지급했었던 여러 경험들이 사람들이 더 기본소득을 많이 상상하게 하고 있는 것 같아요.
굉장히 급변하는 시기에 우리가 좀 살아가고 있다라는 생각이 들고, 이 급변하는 시기는 위기의 시대이기도 하지만 반면에 또 기회로 삼을 수 있는, 그러니까 기존의 구조가 흔들리는 시기이기 때문에.
Another term I've heard a lot is 헬조선. How do you guys feel about this term? Do you agree with it?
이 지옥이라는 곳은 끊임없이 불타야 하는 곳이잖아요. 그러니까 20대들의 그 사망 이유 중에 자살률이 가장 높고, 지금 대한민국의 현실이 좀 그런 데서 오는 거 아닐까. 그러니까 열심히 노력했지만, 그러니까 단군 이래의 최대의 스펙을 갖고 있고 노력해온 세대들이지만 아무리 노력해도 상황이 개선되지 않는다라는 확신을 얻었을 때 절망을 마주하게 되고, 아무리 뭐 아르바이트를 하든 취업 준비를 하든 뭐 아니면 직장을 구해서 집을 구하든 지금보다 나아지지 않을 거다라는 확신, 그러니까 이 지옥에서 벗어날 수 없다는 것이 지옥에 가기 싫은 가장 큰 이유잖아요. 그래서 헬조선이라는 단어도 절대 벗어날 수 없는 현실을 좀 잘 표현하는 단어인 것 같아요.
When you look at politicians like Shin Ji-hye and Young Hae, I think what you see is the face of politics moving forward. All these young people who have been so disenfranchised by Korean society are finding ways to mobilize and channel their frustrations into a very viable and potentially very powerful political force. And it is the thing that does give me hope.
고맙습니다.
I feel for young Koreans. And I'm saying that with the full understanding that I will never really get what it means to have grown up in such a pressure-filled society. But I do think that there are very real problems that society has to grapple with.
Far from being just a few disgruntled teens, the notion of Joseon seems to be a very real struggle. There is an entire generation who, far from giving up, are desperately trying to find their place in modern-day South Korea.
You know, some of the conversations I've had felt really devastating. Throws me into an existential crisis, thinking like, oh my God, how are we going to move forward from this? But of course, I have faith. Koreans are doing something about it. There are so many young people who are stepping up and saying enough is enough. And seeing that is very inspiring.
I don't think hell stands a chance against them.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Charlie, I'm going to let you field some questions or make a comment if you'd like to start things off.
So the piece ended with the narrator there, the producer, sounding an optimistic tone, saying that there are all these movements among young people in Korea to do something about this problem, and she feels optimistic that because of these efforts that there's a good reason to be hopeful. But I wonder, I honestly do, because the pressures in Korean society, which are of long standing and have history behind them, are very, very powerful. And the attitudes that people have are very, very much cemented in place, if that's the word that comes to mind. So, I find it hard to be as optimistic as the young lady who produced this feature. What do you all think?
I think they don't have much choice. And besides, as an American, we've always been taught that youth will make change, and that's where change comes from. So I tend to agree with them. It's going to take longer, but they will prevail.
Okay.
I agree with Charlie that this was really optimistic, frankly. And when you start out with 3 Yonsei students, you're not really looking at people who live in Chosun hell. You're looking at people who have gone over the top. And yeah, they had to struggle and do all that stuff, but I think it's much worse than is portrayed. And I would like to think with her that, yes, there are these movements that she pointed out, I'm sure many more. But I found myself being kind of not wowed, or a little bit, I thought this was a kind of light touch on the problem. I think it's much more serious.
One of the, before this was, I showed this, I was intending some months ago to show a different documentary called Leaving Korea, which was about featuring different individuals, mostly young people in their 20s and 30s, but a few even older than that, who were participating in various programs so that they could emigrate to other countries, to get out of the pressure cooker that Korea has become. And one of the people that was being interviewed, unfortunately, that documentary is no longer available, so I couldn't show it. But one of the people who was being featured was a medical doctor in his early 40s who had agreed to take a job in Arkansas harvesting tobacco for this guy in Arkansas, an American guy, to get that, and that would guarantee him a green card. And he and his family, he had a wife and a small child, so that, and he was saying he didn't want his son, who was now 1 year old or even less than 1 year old, to have to go through what he went through to achieve the status that he achieved. And this was a fellow about 40 years old. He had a rather well-established practice of medicine, and he was an achiever. He was a success story, and he wanted to get out of there. And I'm sure that there are many other people that have similar sentiments who have not done nearly as well as this guy did. So this is a serious problem.
Is it that much different than many of the 20s and 30s in the US who go to a university and then end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loan debt and cannot get a job in whatever field they thought they were going to get in?
I think it is. I think it is much more serious. I think that the job market in Korea is much more constricted. It's harder to get jobs that pay a decent living. I mean, these are people who can't afford a decent place to live. they live with their parents often. I mean, of course, this happens in the United States too, but not nearly to the extent that it does in Korea, I don't think. People who can't even think about getting married. I mean, you saw this fellow that was being interviewed. I mean, he's a rather typical case, I think.
Well, I felt it just reminded me of the book Caste, and just this intergenerational wealth, and that you're just sort of stuck. And I felt that hijab, what does hijab mean? What is I mean, I love that idea of those alternative schools, and I think it will take a while, but I just felt I was very impressed with what they're doing, actually. And I think people, yeah, maybe here it's the same thing, and the debt from university, but I don't think those 3 Yonsei people, I don't know. I didn't feel like they had a lot of hope for their future. And
they were also very not very didn't put a very positive light on the way the system was working for them either.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah.
I've been struck about how quickly American universities have filled up with Korean undergraduates. And I know from our contact with Koreans in Morningside Heights at Columbia, very few of them actually are thinking about going back. They're thinking of graduate schools and the kinds of things that college students think about, but they're not, I'm going to go back and teach at Sogang, or I'm going to go back and teach at Yonsei. I mean, those positions just aren't there for anyone but a tenured professor who's famous, and who can go back and be a department head, or that kind of thing. So I there's evidence of it, and it caught up quickly. I didn't really notice it for years, and then all of a sudden, all the publicity about Hagwons in Korea, being what they are, and Hagwons in the United States for Koreans and other Asians have been a really growth business. There are entrepreneurs in the United States that have made millions starting Hagwons. Koreans flock to them, and other Asian groups realize the same thing, and they can go to prestigious public schools and so on by studying hard at Hagwons. But anyway, my point is that's an important safety valve, I would think, in Korea, because so many students can leave Korea to go to universities abroad.
But there's a class thing there too, because you want to go to live in the United States, you have to have some money to do it.
Yeah, I mean they're generally paying full tuition, and
right, and so you have to come from a family that can afford to send you, and then most Koreans don't have anything like that kind of bank account that would allow them to be able to do such a thing.
But just think,
but it is indicative. It is indicative of the fact that people that people, it doesn't matter what class you come from, people are feeling this pressure. This pressure is rampant throughout the society, regardless of class. But the people who have money are able to do some things about it that those that don't have money can't do, like sending their kids to school in the United States or somewhere in Europe.
But let's put ourselves back in 1966. If we had internet then, you think we'd have a similar disillusionment with society?
Mm-hmm. What do people think?
I mean, one of the things is people now can talk about it. They can basically bear their burden. In 1966, life was probably a lot harder for the average Korean than it is in 2020.
I don't know that that's true. In 1966,
I don't either, but it's a question I want to raise.
And I think in 1966, when we went to Korea, the majority of students did not go to high school. They couldn't afford to go to high school, and so they didn't go. And so they didn't have aspirations to something Korea was still an agricultural society when we
Well,
were there.
I think also in 66, late 60s, Korea was still a pretty leveled society. So the inequality, that is now existent, much like in the US.
That's right. I remember looking at statistics back then in the mid 70s about the level of inequality in Korea versus the United States. And United States level of inequality was far greater than South Korea. That's not true anymore.
Well, maybe kind of interesting.
I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that because I don't know that for a fact. The level of inequality in the United States is sky high. And it's also pretty bad in Korea.
It was interesting how they talked about the English language in connection with these intense tests that they would take over and over and over again and get training in order to do that. And it did remind me of Chosun Dynasty, and it was not the English language at that time, it was classical Chinese.
Right.
And it was examinations for which you would train and train and train and then go sit on the floor and take the exam and hope you passed. And if you didn't, you'd try again and try again and try again. And I don't know, Mike, if you have any comments about that sustained practice over the, many centuries, but I was struck by that feeling. If only we had selfies from, well, we do have a few with Shijo poems from the Chosun Dynasty about people complaining about those exams they had to take. And, it was so much better to be out in the countryside sitting and having a bowl of makgeolli.
Yeah, well, I think that you're alluding to a tradition also that has led to the psychology that we should be able to get ahead if we just work like hell as students. And then the problem is that there is becoming no payoff. This immense expansion of higher education in Korea with all of these people graduating, and they're not able to work at the status that they think they deserve. So you have some of these older ideas mixed up with a new system and a mass and competitive education system that is just unbelievably difficult and competitive.
That's true. I remember in Kwesan, where I did my field work back in the mid 70s, there were no universities at all. There were no institutions of higher education. When I went back in 2010, 2011, there were four colleges, universities in the town of Kwesan. The number of universities and colleges in Korea, places of higher education, has just burgeoned out of, it's a big business. And anybody who wants to go can go. But the question, as Mike is raising, is what's the payoff? Is there a payoff? Now you have a bachelor's degree, but what are you going to do with it?
So once you're really saying education shall not make you free.
Well, if you're a graduate of Seoul, if one of the Sky institutions, then you have a better chance, much better chance than if you go to one of the less prestigious places. Isn't that not? Is that
the other 100 and 240?
Yeah, there are, I think, probably a couple thousand.
Probably by now, yeah.
It's amazing. I think Korea has per capita the largest number of places of higher education schools than any other country in the world.
And 75% of them are in the capital city.
So a question I want to raise is Korea facing the same issues that we are in education? That is, we have for more than 40 years told students, you need to go to college, go to college, go to college, go to college. And in the meantime, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and all those people make a hell of a lot more money nowadays than college educated people do. What has happened to the Korean sector where the trades have they withered on the vine, or are people being able to go into those trades, and what are public attitudes about tradespeople?
I can speak to that a little bit. My friend An Byung-man, who was the Minister of Education under Im Young-bak, the past president, one of the past presidents, was working very hard to encourage the development of vocational education in Korea as a real option for people, for the very reason that you're talking about, Mike. Because there are a lot of opportunities there for skilled workers. The problem is attitudes, though, because
As here.
as it is here, vocational education in the United States, but even more so in Korea, I think, is looked upon as a second-rate education. And if you go to a trade school, if you go to become a welder, then it means that you've thrown in the towel. And parents don't want to see their sons and daughters throwing in the towel. They want them to go to Yonsei or Kode or Seoul National, and so they want them to go to the Hagwons and cram and just live these terrible lives, getting ready to try to get into one of these universities that are very, very hard to get into.
I just
But
wanted to.
Charlie, how does that work? Because there's always going to be a demand for a welder. I mean, a welder
I
can
have
make a living.
story. I have a personal story exactly about that. I have a step grandson whose grandmother and their family own a big wheat ranch in Washington, and we're going to pay for their grandson's college education, just write the whole ticket. And in high school, this young man, one of his classes took welding and loved it, but he went on to the college, was one here in Kentucky, just flunked out after the first semester, didn't go to class at all, then went back where he came from in Alabama and went to community college, studied welding, got a job as an apprentice welder, did the whole routine. And now I think he's in his early 20s as a journeyman welder, making, what close to a six-figure income on that. And it is exactly that, is where he had been encouraged to go to college and just took the other path. I have another grandson who likely will do the same thing with music and so on. And another granddaughter, again, to encourage to go to college, went for a couple of years, dropped out, and went to become a beautician in a high-end kind of beauty salon type stuff. I'm very happy now at what she is doing. And then the other granddaughter who's dropped out of it all and does yoga, works in a yoga studio. And finally, another granddaughter who went on to college and has now become a teacher. So that a very whole different, and my one son who did, one of my sons who graduated from college, very unhappy with that. Thought that was a total waste and should have gone a different route, but the other son, but again, all over the map. And I kind of see that as a hopeful thing for the younger one. The other piece I will just say, when I was in Korea, the revisit in 2019, would be walking the streets of Seoul, and I'm pretty sure it was the neighborhood that we were in with some former students, and saw very little evidence of poverty there, not like the homeless people we would see in the streets of the big cities here. I kind of wondered about that, the high stress levels and the unemployment rate. Where were the folks? Here we'd see that very evident, and I just did not see that when I'm in Seoul.
I just a note about that based on my own experience and knowledge about that, and that is, although the people who are, don't have enough to eat are really living below the poverty line, are certainly not as much as there were when we were in Korea as Peace Corps volunteers. Nowhere near that. People are doing much better than that. However, and it's not so much among the younger generation, that people get, not very well-paying jobs, working in restaurants, working in coffee shops, doing those kinds of jobs, the same kinds of jobs that you see young people doing, and working in McDonald's, those kinds of jobs, very low-paying. So they can't afford. They can barely afford. Sometimes they can't afford it all to find a place to live that they can afford. So what you see is a problem among, first of all, among people our age. There's a great deal of suffering. I would have to use that word, suffering, among older people who don't have enough money to live on, who have to scrounge together a living, and are having a very, very hard time doing it. The suicide rate among people our age is very high in Korea. I don't know if it's higher than young people or lower. I think it's higher. And then among younger people, well, they often live with their parents. They stay with their parents until they're in their 30s or even later, because they have no other choice. They can't live independent lives because they can't find jobs with a decent living wage that will allow them to make a life for themselves independently. And so while you may not call it's not poverty as such, but it's distress, it's duress, I think, at a very high level. And these people are very frustrated. I mean, you saw it reflected in the video. These people are feel like they're under a lot of stress. They work hard and they have nothing to show for it.
One of the comments that one of the band members made about his parents' generation, that when they were growing up, that Korea was expanding and growing economically so rapidly that it was almost impossible to fail in their generation, that a little bit of education and there were jobs everywhere because everything was growing. And they're kind of putting that on that younger generation, saying, well, if you would just apply yourself,
right,
thinking that the rewards would be the same for the same amount of output. And we have that in the US a little bit as well.
You do.
Where, the 70s, the US economy and the college graduates, I mean, there were so many things we could do just by waving our little sheet of paper. But it's certainly not the case now. My daughter said at one point her father implied that if she just applied herself a little bit more, like the band member said, a little more effort, she would have had a better job and been making a lot of money like we did, falling off a log when we came back from Korea. But that was not the case with her in her 20s and 30s. Certainly not the case for her kids in their 20s.
I don't know what the unemployment situation in general was when we were in the Peace Corps and living on until 1970 in Korea. But I know that my students told me, college students told me, that about 30% of their fellows were getting jobs.
30%.
Only
Yeah.
30%.
Meaning the other 70% were not.
There was a very high
30%
unemployment.
I believe it was 30% were getting jobs.
Right. Very high level of unemployment among college graduates. And that was a big issue when we were there.
It was a big issue. And I was in a teacher's college, so they probably were not as badly off as some other majors.
And so it started in the 70s and just got worse.
Well, I thought it got a lot better in between, but that's very impressionistic.
Well, it may
You
be
know, I
that
think,
during this period, during the period of high growth, beginning around the 70s and then
Yeah.
going on through the rest of the 20th century, that things were a lot better, that there was a lot of growth. The rate of well, what was it, 5% a year or some
well,
astronomical,
I think even higher than
or
that.
even higher, 6%.
Oh, much higher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
much higher.
close to
So
10.
you were seeing tremendous growth during those years, and there were a lot of opportunities for people to get work. But that's evened out and isn't nearly as dynamic as it was back then.
Charlie, what impact do you think the Hajar will have or are having now?
You mean the program that was being hard? It's hard to say. It's understandable why it's so attractive to people.
Yeah.
And one would hope that people can come out of those programs, as with progressive education programs here in the States. There are lots of programs, independent programs in the States that attempt to do similar kinds of things for students. And those are great places. And students come out of them with a sense of that feel good about themselves and can make a life for themselves. So whether those will have an impact or not, it's hard to say. I mean, they were saying themselves, some of the people who were interviewed, that they're still looked down upon. You know, the young woman who was the student there was saying, you know, I'm regarded as a dropout. I go to this school, but nobody gives me any credit for that. They look down on me.
I thought mother made sense.
Charlie, has anybody done research on the changes in the educational system to meet the needs of the Korean economy as it's changing from an industrial to a technological economy? It seems to me, you know, as in this country, there's a growing misfit of the educational system and getting people ready for the technological age.
Well, there's a question about whether there are going to be enough jobs for anybody, you know, with computerization and digitization of just about anything. I mean, that's why this business about universal basic income has become such an interesting idea for a lot of people, because there just simply isn't going to be enough work for everybody. Is that a solution?
Also tied to that is this tremendous gap between rich and the poor. The fact that we're seeing increasing bifurcation of our society. And
Yes.
I was kind of charmed by the fact that they wanted to provide special income to kids in poverty level, you know, across the country. Of course, that's socialist, communist, but to me, it made a hell of a lot of sense.
It wasn't clear whether that was across the country or not. There was a
I thought it
program
was.
a chunk ago that they were talking about, and then she made mention of this other thing for like a child, something for children.
Exactly.
And was that nationwide? I don't know if that.
It was supposed to be nationwide.
Okay.
Which struck me as a way to help us overcome this growing gap between rich and poor, and really assure that those at the lower level are getting basic education. But you guys all know that. You're Peace Corps volunteers. I don't have to
Well, we
tell
were
you.
doing that in this country for a year after Biden got into office, and then the whole thing was allowed to die. But during that year, we cut the level of child poverty in this country in half in 1 year because of that program.
I wanted
now it's going back up again.
I wanted to
Sharon had a
interject that I checked. I know this is a complicated issue. It'd be nice if we had someone to come in and do a further economic analysis of South Korea and so forth. But the Gini coefficient, which is the usually used to measure equality on both income and wealth, Korea fares better than the United States.
Okay.
So the numbers perhaps aren't important, but Korea is something like they state it different ways, but 31.4, the low 30s, in the U.S. is low 40s, and the higher the coefficient, the more inequality there is.
Okay, so where does Korea stand among other developed countries?
Well, I'd have to look, but one of the things I checked said is toward the lower end of the scale. But I think it's really complicated, to look at poverty rates and all sorts of different things. I'd really be interested in somebody, if we could invite someone who would explain a lot of that in a digestible form.
Why don't you ask the former ambassador that question and see how she responds?
She indicated to me in the email that she sent that since it's pretty soon after the presidential election, she was going to focus on, she thought she might focus on what to expect from the new president.
Well, I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that one of the very biggest issues in the presidential election was housing, and the difficulty of having a decent place to live. How much a place to live costs in Korea? It's just astronomical.
And whether any of these positions can solve it, the housing problem.
Well, that's the problem. Of course, the previous president had said that he was going to do something about this problem, and he wasn't able to do very much, if anything, about it. And so he left a lot of people feeling very discontented with him for that and other reasons, but that was a big reason.
One of my professor friends says that real estate's great under the Minjudan, the Democratic Party, because the harder they try to control it, the more the prices go up. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a huge, and if we talk about Gini coefficients and that sort of thing, but we look at something, like the nitty gritty, of where am I going to live, and what are the conditions of my life? Am I living in this tiny little cell that's all I can afford, and even that is expensive.
I wonder if many of you know, Korea's Seoul's population has declined from something like 12 million to around 10 million. Because people can't afford to live in the city. So all the satellite cities are growing.
Well, and does not getting married, the people, the marriage rate being down means more people, are living separately? Does that have anything to do with it? I mean, when people are married, they're two people in one apartment or one house. And
definitely there's an increase in, single households, people living alone, but how that impacts the
and they're not taking in their parents.
Sure. Right.
Well, I think what I understood there, as well as happens with here, because of the high cost of apartments and so on, you have several people of both sexes sharing the same apartment, although not related. The apartment with 3 or 4 bedrooms, and then they all share the living space.
We did that in graduate school, right?
I think, but that was graduate school, but I think this has become a much longer term. I have one more. I had a question though. I wondered how the alternative schools were funded. They looked well appointed from what I could see, but if they were frowned upon by the government, I wonder where their funding came from, both for the materials as well as the teacher. Does anyone know?
I don't think they're frowned upon by the government. I don't think that's the case. There may even be some government subsidies for them. I know that there were government subsidies for vocational schools, but that's different. That's a little different from those other alternative school.
I
That-
think
that-
recently the Moon Jae-in government, they were cracking down on international schools. You know, they wanted, you know, as symbols of privilege, you know, people that could go to these internet and foreign language schools too. But I don't know the exact latest status on that, and it'll probably change, you know, with the new government.
I think there was also something about the Hagwon and kind of cracking down on the Hagwon in some ways. I seem to remember reading something.
Periodically, they do crack down on that.
Pardon me?
Yeah, they periodically crack down, but it never sticks.
Yeah.
Right.
For a while, they're closing at 10 and then creeps back.
Oh, right, yeah. So that's right. They were limiting the hours that they could stay open. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that was really fascinating, Charlie. It's almost 10:30. We don't have time for a breakout session, which I guess is okay. I started the recording a little late because Ned Schultz did not remind me to record.
It's all Ned's fault.
But you know, Diane will send out the link in case you want to see the first few minutes that I didn't include. And I've included everything up to now, you know, our discussions. So I'm going to stop it right now. Stop.